Good morning, you three, and welcome to a brand new term. I hope you took the chance to take a break from your learning and enjoy some of the lovely weather that we had on a few of the days. I hope you did some lovely activities, but most of all, I hope you have rested your brains ready for a new term of learning. Okay, so this lesson is going to be our first reading lesson of the term. So I'm just going to share my screen over here. And as you can see today, it's the 22nd of February 2021, and we're going to explore new words. So we're going to start a brand new book this term. I'm sure you all enjoyed learning about the Iron Man and reading the Iron Man story. I know that it was one of my favorite books. And I also enjoyed watching the movie The Iron Giant as well, which is based off of this book. Okay, so great story, all about friendship. And now we're going to focus on a new one. And this one is also one of my favorite books that I read when I was growing up. And I'm going to give you a few clues so you can try and guess what it might be. So this is the first clue. Okay, a few chocolate bars. Okay, what book do you think that might be? All right, so you've got the chocolate, then you've got a factory. Okay, a factory where there are lots of workers. Um, does that give you any clues so far? So you've got some chocolate, you've got a factory, and that is actually the name of the book, if you've guessed it. But if you haven't, there's also this golden ticket. All right, very exciting. What is that golden ticket? What does it let you do? Where does it take you? Okay, so have you figured out what the book is? All right, hopefully you have. And the book is Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Okay, as we keep showing you, there are lots of different book covers for this story, but they are all the same story, written by the same author, which is Roald Dahl. Okay, so have a look at these different book covers and have a think about which one might be your favorite and why that book cover might be your favorite. What about that book cover has made you really interested and would make you want to pick up this book and read it? Okay, for me, it would probably be this one right here because I'm thinking, ooh, there's a boy called Charlie. He's got this golden ticket. Where does it take him? What happens in the chocolate factory? Who is this character? You know, with a big polka dot bow and a purple coat and a top hat. So, you know, what does he have to do with this story? So I'd be really, really interested in this book cover. Okay. Now, have a think before we move on. What other book has this author written? Because we have done a book of his earlier on in the term, and that book was The Twits. So this author also wrote The Twits. Okay, if you remember that story where the Twits had the shrinks at the very end, they were two horrible, nasty people, and they did horrible things to Mugglewump and his family of monkeys. And in the end, they got their revenge on them and gave them the shrinks. So Roald Dahl has written The Twits, and now he's also written Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. So I think we're going to enjoy this story, especially because I know most of us enjoyed The Twits, and this is by the same author. So it might be that we enjoyed this story as well. Okay, so before we move on, have a think. Now, here's another book cover again. Okay, so Charlie is meeting this character. So maybe, okay, maybe it's about Charlie getting this golden ticket to go to the chocolate factory and he meets this character here. And those are the clues that I can see. Okay, obviously, there's going to be lots of sweets and chocolates involved. Some of my favorite things. So I think that's what this book is going to be about. Possibly Charlie getting a ticket to the chocolate factory where he meets whoever this is, and maybe he gets a chance to eat lots of sweets. So those are the clues that I see, and that's what I think the book is going to be about. Okay, right. Let's read the beginning of the story. And it's chapter 1. Here comes Charlie. These two very old people are the father and mother of Mr. Bucket. Their names are Grandpa Joe and Grandma Josephine. Okay, so Grandpa Joe over here, Grandma Josephine over here. And these two very old people are the father and mother of Mrs. Bucket. Their names are Grandpa George and Grandma Georgina. Okay, so those are the father and mother of Mrs. Bucket. So who do you think these two people are? Well, it would reason to say this is Mr. Bucket, this is Mrs. Bucket. Mr. and Mrs. Bucket have a small boy whose name is Charlie Bucket. Okay, so there right away we're seeing the title character. Okay, Charlie in the Chocolate Factory. So their small boy is Charlie Bucket. So this boy over here is probably Charlie Bucket. Have a look at this picture. Have a look at their clothes. What do you notice about them? What does this tell you about them? Okay. What can you also tell about the grandparents sitting over here? Well, to me, it looks like the grandparents are really old. Okay, they stay in bed and Mrs. Bucket will have to look after them. But looking at the state of their clothes, they're quite dirty. It looks like they're a little bit old. I might stand that they don't really have too much money or they work really hard, okay, which is why they're wearing quite dirty clothes. All right, so just have a think about that. This is Charlie. How do you do, and how do you do, and how do you do again? He is pleased to meet you. The whole of this family, the 6 grown-ups, count them, and little Charlie Bucket live together in a small wooden house on the edge of a great town. The house wasn't nearly large enough for so many people, and life was extremely uncomfortable for them all. There were only 2 rooms in the place altogether, and there was only 1 bed. Now imagine a house, okay, for 6 grown-ups and 1 child, and there's only 2 rooms in the entire house and just 1 bed. Okay, so what do you think that tells you now? It's giving you a little bit more information about the family. What do you think that tells you? The bed was given to the 4 old grandparents because they were so old and tired. They were so tired, they never got out of it. So that kind of explains this picture over here. You've got these 2 parents on these 2 grandparents on this side of the bed, and then these 2 on the other side of the bed. So the 4 of them share 1 bed. Okay? And they were so tired they never got out of it. So Grandpa Joe and Grandma Josephine on this side, Grandpa George and Grandma Georgina on this side. Mr. and Mrs. Bucket and little Charlie Bucket slept in the other room upon mattresses on the floor. In the summertime, this wasn't too bad, but in the winter, freezing cold drafts blew across the floor all night long, and it was awful. So I'm just going to highlight that word drafts over there because that's a word that we haven't heard before. And what do we think it means? In the winter, freezing cold drafts blew across the floor. Well, that tells me it's something that's blowing. And what is something that blows quite a lot and is cold? It would tell me that that is probably a breeze. Okay. There wasn't any question of them being able to buy a better house or even 1 more bed to sleep in. They were far too poor for that. And here is a picture of their house. As you can see, not very big, not very modern, looks a little bit broken up, looks a little bit battered, and they can't buy a better house because they were a bit too poor for that, which is why they've got just 2 rooms and only 1 bed. Okay. Mr. Bucket was the only person in the family with a job. He worked in a toothpaste factory where he sat all day long at a bench and screwed the little caps onto the tops of the tubes of toothpaste after the tubes had been filled. But a toothpaste cap screwer is never paid very much money. And poor Mr. Bucket, however hard he worked and however fast he screwed on the caps, was never able to make enough to buy 1/2 of the things that so large a family needed. There wasn't even enough money to buy proper food for them all. The only meals they could afford were bread and margarine for breakfast, boiled potatoes and cabbage for lunch, and cabbage soup for supper. Sundays were a bit better. They all looked forward to Sundays because then, although they had exactly the same, Everyone was allowed a second helping. So let's just think carefully about that bit. Just bread and margarine for breakfast. If you don't know what margarine is, well, it's not exactly butter. It's like a butter substitute. And it's not really, it's got a little bit of milk in it, but it's mainly made from oils. Okay, so that's what margarine is. I'm highlighting that because that's a new word that we probably haven't heard. So bread and margarine for breakfast, boiled potatoes and cabbage for lunch. So just boiled potatoes and cabbage, and then cabbage soup for supper. Okay. You can't see, there's no pizza, there's no burgers, there's no chicken, there's no spaghetti, there's no garlic bread, there's nothing like that. There's no cottage pie. It is just those three meals every day. Okay. The buckets, of course, didn't starve. Well, they wouldn't because they are eating some food. But every one of them, the two old grandfathers, the two old grandmothers, Charlie's father, Charlie's mother, and especially little Charlie himself, went about from morning till night with a horrible empty feeling in their tummies. Charlie felt it worst of all, and although his father and mother often went without their own share of lunch or supper so that they could give it to him, it still wasn't nearly enough for a growing boy. Well, it's not really a lot of food, is it? He desperately wanted something more filling and satisfying than cabbage and cabbage soup. The one thing he longed for more than anything else was, we all know that word, chocolate. I have highlighted desperately though, because desperately is a new word that we might encounter, and it means that he really, really wants something. He's really passionate about it. He desperately wants it. So he really, really, greatly, deeply wants something more satisfying than cabbage, and that would be chocolate. Walking to school in the mornings, Charlie could see great slabs of chocolate piled up high in the shop windows, and he would stop and stare and press his nose against the glass, his mouth watering like mad. Many times a day, he would see the other children taking bars of creamy chocolate out of their pockets and munching them greedily. And that, of course, was pure torture. Okay, so that is really torturing him that he can't have chocolate when everyone else can. Only once a year on his birthday, so once a year, did Charlie Bucket ever get to taste a bit of chocolate. The whole family saved up their money for that special occasion, and when the great day arrived, Charlie was always presented with one small chocolate bar to eat all by himself. And each time he received it, on those marvelous birthday mornings, he would place it carefully in a small wooden box that he owned, and treasured it as though it were a bar of solid gold. And for the next few days, he would allow himself only to look at it, but never to touch it. Well, why do you think that is? Why do you think Charlie is keeping it in the small wooden box and he didn't touch it? He'd only look at it. Okay? Well, it's probably because he only gets one bar each year. And one bar each year, you want to make that last as long as possible. So for the first couple days, he wouldn't touch it. He'd only look at it. Then at last, when he could stand it no longer, he would peel back a tiny bit of the paper wrapping at one corner to expose a tiny bit of chocolate. And then he would take a tiny nibble. What do we think expose means? It means to unwrap it, okay? He's unwrapping the paper. He's revealing a little bit of chocolate. And he would take a tiny nibble, just enough to allow the lovely sweet taste to spread out slowly over his tongue. The next day, he would take another tiny nibble, and so on and so on. And in this way, Charlie would make his six-penny bar of birthday chocolate last him for more than a month. Imagine year threes having one bar of chocolate and making it last an entire month. I know I tend to eat a lot of chocolate all at once, but Charlie would make his last an entire month. Okay, right, we're almost at the end of the chapter. But I haven't told you about the one awful thing that tortured little Charlie, the lover of chocolate, more than anything else. This thing for him was far, far worse than seeing slabs of chocolate in the shop windows or watching other children munching bars of creamy chocolate right in front of him. It was the most terrible, torturing thing you could imagine, and it was this. In the town itself, actually within sight of the house in which Charlie lived, there was an enormous chocolate factory. Aha, here we go. Here is the last bit of the title, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Just imagine that. And it wasn't simply an ordinary enormous chocolate factory either. It was the largest and most famous in the whole world. It was Wonka's factory, owned by a man called Mr. Willy Wonka, the greatest inventor and maker of chocolates that there has ever been. And what a tremendous, marvelous place it was! It had huge iron gates leading into it and a high wall surrounding it, and smoke belching from its chimneys, and strange whizzing sounds coming from deep inside. And outside the walls, for half a mile around in every direction, the air was scented with the heavy, rich smell of melting chocolate. Now that is a lovely smell. Okay, I love the smell of melted chocolate. It just smells so warm and delicious to me. Okay. Again, highlighted two words over here. We've got tremendous, and think about it, tremendous. If you look over here, it kind of sounds like an enormous. It is a huge factory, okay? A great factory, a large factory, a tremendous factory. And smoke belching from its chimneys. Now, I know we've heard of the word belch before, and it does mean to burp, okay? But in this case, smoke doesn't burp from the chimneys. Smoke is just coming out in large amounts. So that's what belching means over here. It's coming out in large amounts. Okay. Twice a day on his way to and from school, little Charlie Bucket had to walk right past the gates of the factory. And every time he went by, he would begin to walk very, very slowly. Why do you guys think that is? Well, he would hold his nose high in the air and take long, deep sniffs of the gorgeous chocolatey smell all around him. Oh, how he loved that smell. And oh, how he wished he could go inside the factory and see what it was like. Okay, so that is the end. Well done for reading with me and making it through chapter 1. I've gone over some of our key words that we will be focusing on today because our learning objective was to explore the meaning of new words. Okay, and remember, you don't have to write anything down. Your assignment is going to be on Teams. Okay, so it's a little quiz. And it is, what do you think are the meanings of the new words? Okay, so we went through most of these words. I didn't do the first one. But if you go onto Teams now and complete your assignment, please go ahead. If you want to rewatch the video for help, where I highlighted those words, go back, watch it again. It'll help you complete the assignment, okay? The only one I didn't help you with was number 1, because I want to see if you remember the use of your prefixes, a big focus last term, talking about those prefixes, okay? So number 1, what does uncomfortable mean? Okay, so does it mean not comfortable, very comfortable, or super comfortable? What does uncomfortable mean? And number 2, in the phrase freezing cold drafts, what does drafts mean? Okay, looking for that word drafts. Okay, number 3, what is margarine? So I did talk about this. So if you can't remember, go back in the video. And then you can complete your assignment on Teams, because remember, you don't have to submit it until you're completely sure what your answer is, okay? Then number 4, in the phrase, he desperately wanted, what does desperately mean? Did he truly and seriously want something? Did he happily want something? Or did he slowly want something? What does desperately mean? Number 5, what does expose mean in the phrase, expose a tiny bit of chocolate? Did he uncover or reveal that chocolate? Did he cover up the chocolate? Did he wrap it up? What does expose mean? He exposed a tiny bit of chocolate. And then I just talked about this. What does belching mean in the phrase, belching, smoke belching from its chimneys? Now, I do know there's 2 meanings to the word belching, but what does it mean in this phrase, smoke belching from its chimneys? Okay. And then your last question, there are two answers for this. So please tick two answers. Okay. So you have to tick two to get 2 points. So is it very large in scale, very small in scale, extremely good and impressive, or terrible and bad? Tremendous. You have to tick two of these, okay? Not just one. You have to tick two to get both marks. All right. So well done, year three. If you'd like to go over the video again, please do so. But if not, just complete your assignment on Teams. Make sure you click the hand in button. Okay. And when you're done handing it in, you should get a little animation of a little reward for you, a little graphic that shows up, and that tells you that you've handed it in. Okay. So hope you enjoyed the first reading lesson this term. Please take your time with it. You can always go back to it later on in the week. You don't have to do it all at once. Just take your time, take it slow, work at your own pace, okay? So well done, and I will see you tomorrow again for another reading lesson. Okay, just gonna stop.